Now, one of the trade battles that Australia's facing with China is over our wheat exports. The Asian nation accounts for around 10% of Australian wheat trade, and the industry is facing uncertainty as tensions mount. Joining me to discuss the problems facing wheat growers is Grain Producers Australia Chairman Andrew Weidemann. Andrew, I was absolutely stunned to learn that China only took 880 tonnes of Australian wheat in November, the lowest amount since 2011. Take us through where we're at in this relationship.
Yes, look, it's obviously been a strained relationship for a while, particularly with the barley situation, but quite clearly, though, the wheat situation is probably on the back of a record drought here in Australia, that we had such a low number in November of deliveries. We know that the quota between China and the rest of the world is somewhere around that 9.6 million tonnes, and we're getting very close to that world quota, which I believe it ticks over again on the 1st of January. So in 2021, we're certainly looking to China to purchase more wheat from Australia. And talking with a number of our traders, even though we haven't had the large volumes of barley, which has really impacted our industry financially, the wheat sales, I believe, have been very strong, and we're hopeful that that will continue with China going forward.
In terms of the impact of drought, take us through the conventional wisdom for city folks is that the drought has largely been eliminated. We've had good falls. We're in a La Nina. What's your constituency look like across the spectrum? Are there pockets still afflicted by drought, or have you managed to get a reasonably decent growing year in?
Well, look, in the grains industry, we've had probably in the top 5 years of production, but quite clearly, Kate, and for the listeners, there are areas, as you've suggested, certainly in northern New South Wales and in southern Queensland, where unfortunately some of those pockets and areas have not had a very good season, which for some is nearly 4 years in a row. So we're aware that not everywhere has been good, but when you come down through New South Wales, they've produced somewhere in the order, we believe, of around 11 million tonne of wheat, which is a historical high for particularly New South Wales. And as I said, we believe that this year, on statistics and on our knowledge through our membership right across Australia, that this is somewhere in the top 5 potential grain years for our commodities right across the spectrum. So we've seen plenty of areas with good yields in canola, particularly where I farm here in Victoria and through into the Mallee of Victoria. We've seen pulses out yield, in some cases wheat, for the first time. So it's been quite an incredible year for some growers that have been fortunate enough to receive rain when they needed it. But, you know, if we look back to July, June and July, it's probably some of the driest 2 months that we've seen nearly in my farming career here at Rapagna in Victoria.
If I can ask something just of a personal nature, have people found it just too tough and walked off the land? And what's the mental health out in regional Australia been like? Have you seen people just decide it's too hard during this drought? And worse still, has there been an incidence of self-harm amongst your constituency? How have they held up?
Yes, no, look, there's no doubt that the mental health aspects of the Australian agricultural sector is probably at an all-time low, and that's been induced by prolonged years of drought, certainly in the New South Wales, Queensland regions, northern Victoria. There's been prolonged dry periods, and certainly from the aspect of mental health, it's something that we're very cautious of, and we're obviously trying to make sure that our membership is working together collectively to ensure the well-being of all of our people. There's nothing worse than hearing about somebody taking their own life. I think it's one of the harshest things that we can ever hear of in a local rural community. It affects everybody.
Absolutely.
There's no question of that. And it is something that, you know, we work with Beyond Blue and other organisations wherever we can. And personally, I've spent nights out in halls talking about mental health with farmers and their families.
Well, that's absolutely wonderful news, because I know the burden. I've got friends in around the Auckland area in Queensland, and they've had a very tough time. They got some sorghum in last year, and the hail came, and you do it tough. But just to round this out, the contribution, as I understand it, of the grains industry is $4.6 billion annually. So the myth about Australia riding on the sheep's back, we ride on your back as much as we do on mining, don't we? You've got a huge role to play. So as I understand it, if we can get kick-started there, their demand and prices are very favourable at the moment. Is that correct?
Well, look, that's correct. I mean, China, when they're on, they're really on. They pay generally the most amount of value in global terms for our trade. It was interesting. I actually had a meeting today in Hamilton with Trade Minister Dan Tehan, and we spoke about, the opportunities that we both see for our industry, particularly the grains industry, and some of the emerging countries that are looking to buy and purchase grain from Australia. There's a lot of work ahead of us, but, teamwork is what we're about, and that's where the rural sector comes together, and we'll work with our government and we'll work with our industry partners to deliver what we can in 2021, particularly for all of those areas, and try and create as much value as possible from the grain that we've just harvested, because we know we've got to put that back into the pockets of those rural communities right down the East Coast and right across Australia whenever it's possible to do so.
Now, last question, Andrew. I guess a lot of you'd be pretty mechanised, especially in the wheat sector with headers and so on, and probably your farmers want to operate those themselves. They're expensive kit. But is there any shortage of the manual labour that you normally get? That I've heard that COVID's impacted a lot of the itinerant workforce around regional Australia doing stuff. Has that had any impact on grain, or is that more a fruit industry problem?
Look, in the more intensive industries, hands-on, it's probably had a much larger impact. But certainly the grains industry across Australia has been impacted, particularly in Western Australia, where they really do rely very heavily on the backpacker. We've been able to partner with a range of governments and also with Qantas, believe it or not. We've been able to work with them in deploying people around Australia into jobs and circumstances to try and help them through the current situation. We launched a training platform on a Grain Producers Australia website there back in the middle of the year, and that's worked well. We've been able to connect people where we can. The Victorian government got on board and they delivered some financial help to us to develop further parts of that program, which is still work in progress. As we go into the cropping season, we'll be looking for more workers, and as this harvest winds up here in the southern part of Victoria, then we're going to obviously still need people to work where they can. But the more hands-on intensive industries are really going to struggle to find enough people.